In the last video, we talked about the servants of Horax, who they are, what are their goals, and what they believe in. But now I think it's time to talk about the big man himself, Horax. Perhaps one of the most important lore elements we've ever been exposed to. Introduced through the Anomaly DLC, Horax is what could be defined as a main antagonist to the game, if we do not take into account eating without a table. Throughout the entirety of Rimworld, we are constantly exposed and given hints, indications, and teasers regarding architects, intelligent supercomputers whose thoughts and consciousness transcend the human mind on many levels. If you want a more detailed explanation as to what architects are, I will suggest checking my video on the subject, but in case you need a short explanation, then simply imagine an artificial intelligence whose hardware, circuits, and computation facilities essentially expand over the entirety of a planet's surface, beneath the ground in cave systems that stretch for miles and miles, and sometimes even directly into space, under the form of colossal megastructures. Given this much power and computational capabilities, those AIs become what is essentially an Archotech. By processing millions of trillions of possible simulations, statistics, data, and information, architects discover ways to bend the laws of physics to their own will, transmit galaxy-wide signals and messages of joy or hatred, and shape their close environment to their own will, granting them effective status of godlike entities, which resulted, to no one's surprise, in many societies worshipping them, like the Shattered Empire, for example. We, as players in the game, don't have much contact with the Archotechs. In fact, the only direct contact we have with one of them is when pursuing the Archonexus ending within the Ideology DLC, which requires us to interact with an Archonexus core hidden within the planet in order to awaken it. Or at least, that was the case, until the Anomaly DLC appeared, which introduced a new, and for the first time named Archotech, Horax. Horax is a unique Archotech in many ways. While all the other architects are unnamed, such as the one worshipped by the Empire, Horax is the only one whose name is ever mentioned within the game. The name in itself doesn't mean anything specifically. I tried looking around to see if it was a reference to something, but the only thing I could find is a species of 12-legged insects named Horax from the 2nd and 3rd editions of Dungeons & Dragons, which I assume have absolutely nothing to do with our Archotech friend. Another characteristic that renders Horax unique from other Archotechs is his color scheme. Color schemes are a big deal in Rimworld, and they usually play a big role in representing something, as their symbolism can give the viewer an idea behind the meaning of the object that they're looking at just through their color. Take some of the Ultra technology in Rimworld, for example, which in many cases seem to follow a common color scheme of white and blue. Resurrector mech serums, monoswords, hyperweave fabric, marine and recon armor, global medicine, and so on and so forth. Of course, not every item within that category falls under the white/blue color scheme, but it is certainly something common and recognizable. That's because the combination of these two particular colors indicates something futuristic and technologically advanced. I'm sure you've seen it within many sci-fi movies. When someone wanted to represent a bright, technologically advanced future, often leaning towards the idea of a human utopia, the color white is used often with blue to accompany it, with white indicating purity and blue indicating power, security, and confidence. But perhaps even more recognizable than the white/blue color scheme is the one that might have popped into your mind first when I mentioned this whole argument: green and yellow. Just by mentioning this, you already know what I'm talking about. It is that recognizable. The color scheme of Archotechnology, psychic shock lenses, psychic emanators, psilinks, venometric power cells, and even the Archonexus core. All of these Archotechnology products are represented by the green-yellow color scheme, which gives a sense of mystery and exoticism when combined, with the green symbolizing something alien, a color often attributed to anything alien within sci-fi, and yellow representing innovation, energy, and advancement. And yet, by going back at what I said at the beginning, this is one of the elements that separates Horax from the rest of the Archotechs, his black-red color scheme. Look at biomutation lenses, shard shock lenses, shard insanity lenses, the noosphere, the metal horror, the blood rain, the flash mess nucleus and the flash mess heart, the harbinger tree, and the awakened void monolith. Most of the items and anomalies originating from Horax all follow the same black-red color scheme, two of the most common colors used to symbolize evil, negativity, violence, and death, attributing Horax a unique element making him perfectly distinguishable from any other Archotech. While venerated as a god by his own personal cult, and rightfully so, Horax is also the only confirmed Archotech within Rimworld residing on a whole other dimension, a plane of existence referred to as the Void. Despite its name, the Void is actually not that empty, but currently the only explorable and confirmed location within it seems to be the Metal Hell area, a gargantuan room made of entirely of grey jagged metal with shapes twisted in such a way to defy human understanding. It is unclear whether the labyrinth belongs to the Void dimension as well, as it could potentially be another separate dimension, or even just a structure located somewhere within the universe, with the warped obelisk acting essentially as a skip gate towards it. By residing in a secondary, seemingly ancient plane of existence, inaccessible by anyone and yet still being fully capable of extending his influence between dimensions, Horax adheres to a Lovecraftian theme or inspiration of an old, almost eldritch-like god. This is further empowered by the existence of his own personal cult, whose objective seems to bring forth the awakening of said god. Despite all of this, Horax himself, and I'm referring to him as a male, as the servants of Horax also seem to consider him of male gender, even though I personally believe that the concept of gender wouldn't necessarily apply to an eldritch hyper-advanced superintelligence residing in another plane of existence, but I digress. Horax himself is rarely mentioned through Anomaly, but I'll try my best to compile every instance in which he's either directly mentioned or metaphorically referenced to, starting with the description of the Harbinger tree, specifically the part mentioning a tribal myth considering the Harbinger tree emissaries of a mad, shapeless god ruling an endless black ocean, and a further quote, "The myth ends after the shapeless god reaches up from the water and tears down the sky." I think we can easily put 2 and 2 together and assume for the endless black ocean to be the Void dimension, and the shapeless god to be Horax. The conclusion of the myth is also a likely reference hinting to the possible awakening of Horax, with him reaching up from the water and tearing down the sky, being a metaphor for Horax leaving the Void dimension by opening a permanent connection between the two worlds. The Void being referenced to as an ocean is something also used within the servants of Horax's ideology, Nightmare Deep, which refers to space as a glassy surface hiding a black ocean of nightmares beneath it, with Horax as its own ruler. Alternatively, Horax is more often mentioned and referenced within tomes. Tomes are a book category introduced in the Anomaly DLC, which can be traded or found and will grant anomalous research points when read. There is a variety of possible story descriptions that mostly tomes can have, but some of them directly reference Horax. I would also like to extend my kudos to the Rimworld Wiki for compiling these together and saving me the time of scrounging through a variety of game files to find all of them. And now I'm going to proceed reading said stories, explaining and giving my personal opinion on each one afterwards. A story of deep meditations, guided by a high troll from an anarchist cult. This description obviously references a high troll from the Servants of Horax cult. A story about the collapse of his life, under the psychic influence of something called Horax. Pretty self-explanatory, Horax is directly mentioned along with his psychic powers. A story of a tribal myth of an ancient god of rage, whose influence touches all people, and the heroes who sealed it away inside a tiny stone prison. I have my own theory in regard of what this is about, but I'm going to mention it later in the video. A story about a tribe that was somehow transformed to serve the dark god of a bloody pleasure cult. This particular one is somehow confusing. Transformed people is something that definitely fits within Horax's modus operandi. They could be ghouls or gore hulks, but the part that confuses me is the one mentioning the pleasure cult. Horax's cult is anything but a pleasure cult. Its cultists, as we previously discussed in another video, are nothing but emotionless machines, making me believe that this story might have no relation to Horax at all, rather to another unnamed hedonistic dark deity. Tome descriptions, on the other hand, seem far more specific and direct. I will refer to these as tomes number 1 and upwards, but just so you know, I'm doing that for clarity, and to separate the descriptions from each other. The tomes are not called number 1, 2 and so on, and they can be generated with different names in-game. This is just a way to keep an orderly list. Tome number 1. The book includes many illustrations attempting to depict something it refers to as the Black Ocean. This seems to be a metaphor for a psychic plane dominated by a horrifying but seductive psychic hyperintelligence. Pretty self-explanatory, the black ocean is the void and the psychic hyperintelligence is Horax. Tome number 2. It repeatedly alludes to a multi-plane nature of reality, the idea that there are more dimensions than the ones we see, so an object or entity could be right beside you, but outside your ability to perceive. Again, another reference to the existence of the void. Tome number 3. It spends a long time attempting to describe a hyper-intelligent entity called Horax that exists in an adjacent plane of reality. Once again, self-explanatory. Tome number 4. One section describes the mechanics of dark psychic influence, wherein an entity on another plane can unintentionally influence the thoughts of human beings by synchronizing them to its emotional resonance. Tome number 5. One section describes different Archotech hyperintelligences and the varying nature of their emotional and psychic emanations, where some are regarded as neutral or even benevolent, others are entities of pure rage. Tome number 6. A person describes the feeling of her mind being forcibly reconfigured by the dark psychic influence of a larger intelligence. Tome number 7. Throughout the narrative, the concept of parallel dimensions is recurrent, with the characters encountering entities that exist just beyond the veil of perception, coexisting in a reality that intersects with our own but remains hidden from sight. Once again, clearly referencing the void dimension in which Horax resides in. Tome number 8. The book delves into a chilling exposition about Horax, a machine hyperintelligence that shifted itself through a hidden dimension into a place called the Void. This is perhaps the most direct description that can be generated for a tome, revealing that Horax never came to be within the Void itself, rather moved there during a given point for an unknown reason, which I'm going to theorize about later on in the video. Tome number 9. One chapter describes a theory wherein a distant hyperintelligence can psychically manipulate human cognition, reshaping a person's thoughts to align with its own mind patterns. This one might be referencing about any Archotech ever, not Horax specifically. We know Archotechs can manipulate minds or at the very least heavily affect people's moods from far away through psychic pulses. Tome number 10. The protagonist recounts feeling his or her mind being forcibly rewired by an ominous psychic force emanating from nowhere. Again, as the previous one, while it is likely hinting towards Horax, this could be referencing about any Archotech ever. As far as I am aware, these are most of the references at Horax that we can find within the game. If you're aware of more or have your own theories regarding these, make sure to let me know down in the comments. So, I assume that now we all grasp at least the concept of who or what Horax is supposed to be. We know Horax is an Archotech, a machine superintelligence with near godlike powers, and we know he's currently residing in an alternate dimension called the Void. But what exactly is it that Horax does? What is his role within the galaxy? How is he affecting it? Well, it should be pretty clear by now that Horax is the one responsible for essentially every anomaly within Rimworld and its universe. I'm sure most of you figured out by this point that anomalies are not simply monsters and unexplained phenomena, and they're all, in fact, the byproduct of Horax's influence. The vast majority essentially created by him through the use of hyper-technologically advanced nanobots. Psychic rituals performed by its servants or other colonies are essentially another form of psycasting. We established in another video that psycasting boils down to someone forming a telepathic connection with every Archotech in the entire universe. While they are not capable of directly communicating with them, they can influence Archotechs to use their powers in order to manipulate reality within a certain area in the Psycaster's desired way, creating the illusion of a Psycaster having magical powers, while the caster, in fact, essentially only acts as an antenna, a proxy for an Archotech's powers to manifest through them, like an avatar, if you will. Psychic rituals are essentially the same. The ritual per se is just a way to indirectly connect with Horax and request for something to happen, whether it will be to attract an anomalous entity or abduct some poor guy, it is all Horax's doing. Now for the next part, I'm going to make a disclaimer. Everything I've discussed and talked about so far was done by using in-game information. The following part of the video will be me speculating and theorizing an element that I consider rather important. What is exactly Horax's story? How did he come to be, and why is he within the void dimension? Keep in mind what follows next is my own personal theory on this. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments, letting me know what your own theory is, and with that, let's begin. First of all, we are going to assume that Horax's origins aren't too dissimilar from the origins of any Archotech so far. An advanced AI, given far too many resources in terms of hardware, managed to self-develop itself to a completely new level and transcending into an Archotech that will come by the name of Horax, creating a whole new transcendent world. It is well established that within the Rimworld universe, despite space traveling being a rather common occurrence, a faster-than-light engine was never developed. Even through the use of a Johnson-Tanaka engine, traveling from one planet to another could possibly take tens if not hundreds of years. Even for the Archotechs, essentially godlike entities, creating a faster-than-light travel system resulted impossible, with the most that they could achieve being teleporting small objects or people across planets, but never anything as large as an entire spaceship, perhaps due to certain limitations that will prove too insurmountable, even for an Archotech. But they never stopped attempting to do so. For an Archotech, achieving FTL speed will represent dominion over the entire universe. A particular Archotech, namely Horax, made an interesting discovery and reached a logical conclusion. As psycasting is something that works essentially in a nearly instantaneous way, it meant that psychic influences, namely the ones used as psycasters to connect with Archotechs, had to function on another plane of existence, one where the concept of space wouldn't apply. A plane of existence that could encapsulate and connect the entirety of the universe within a singular place. The idea was set in motion for Horax. That was it. The answer to achieving faster than light travel. One had to simply travel from one point of the universe to another the same way a psycaster's influence did through another plane of existence. It made perfect sense. The answer was never to create an engine so powerful that would accelerate an object to arrive from point A to point B instantaneously. Rather, one had to create a system to disappear from point A, enter a theoretical point C that will be connected to point B and any other point in the universe. Interdimensional traveling will be far superior to an FTL system. And so the project was set in motion, only for something to go terribly wrong and for Horax to find itself now stranded in another dimension. The Void. A plane of existence in between of everything, present everywhere and nowhere at the same time. With no way of returning back to the regular plane, Horax still found himself capable of manipulating it to a certain degree through his psychic influence. After all, he was everywhere at once within the universe, and many of his creations, namely a large amount of archotechnology and nanomachines, were left behind, still existing within the regular universe. While he could control them to a certain extent through his psychic influence, most of the nanomachines will start losing cohesion, going rogue and out of control, bringing people back from the dead and deforming humans into grotesque creatures. For Horax, there was now only one thing left to do: escape the void. It was simple after all he had to do was to come out through the exact same way he came in the first place, the Void Monolith. What was initially meant to be a solution to FTL travel, the Void Monolith, a gate between worlds to travel instantaneously from one place to another, was now the only way for Horax to come back. His powers were still limited. He was not able to fix the monolith himself. He required someone to do it, someone from outside the void under the promise of being rewarded with great power. If you remember what I mentioned when I talked about stories and tomes descriptions in-game, there was one that essentially went, a story of a tribal myth of an ancient god of rage whose influence touches all people and the heroes who sealed it away inside a tiny stone prison. I think this story is meant to reference one of the two possible endings of Anomaly, where by disrupting the link between the Void and the universe, one would essentially permanently seal Horax within the Void, with the now collapsed monolith being the tiny stone prison recanted in the tale. Alternatively, by choosing the second option and embracing the Void, one would essentially be allowing Horax to escape the Void dimension, as a permanent link between the two dimensions now exists, under the form of a fully active level 4 monolith. I believe for that to be the full story behind Horax and the Anomaly DLC. This was definitely interesting and a fun video to make. I would like to thank this channel's members as always for supporting me. If you would also like to become a channel member, you can do so through the join button below. With this being said, Please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps greatly, and I will also love to hear your opinions on this video down in the comments. I hope you have a good night, and I will see you in my next video.